Good evening and good afternoon for those of you who are joining on the West Coast. It's that time. We are at Countdown Week for Academic World Quest, and I'm delighted to welcome students, educators, our council partners, and even some sponsors as well. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our kickoff event of Academic World Quest Countdown Week, and of course, we are all looking ahead to Saturday afternoon's competition, again, Saturday afternoon East Coast time. I'm Bill Clifford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America, and I'm pleased this evening to introduce Kevin Cassidy, who is a director and representative to the Bretton Woods Multilateral Organizations at the International Labor Organization's Office for the United States. Before I say a few words about Kevin and the great partnership we've cultivated with ILO since last summer, I want to just introduce Laura Duncan, who is really the guru for Academic World Quest, as well as our communications and marketing director at WACA. Laura is going to say a few words. She has done, by the way, just an incredible job to see that all the technology and really the whole program works, and has led our team through this process. And Laura's going to mention, importantly, some information about AWQ bingo so that you can begin the countdown week and learn about this. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. So everyone, we're really excited to have you joining us for this kickoff event all the way through Saturday. And as Bill mentioned, the bingo challenge, which all students, teachers should have received that information by now. The student bingo is basically a week-long challenge for you to get engaged with our daily programming and communications. And as you fill out those bingo challenges, you will be able to enter yourself in for a prize, a raffle drawing the day of the competition. And so a huge part of the bingo cards completion is to take part in the weekly programming, such as tonight's program with ILO and with Kevin. And we're really looking forward to hearing everything and getting a tour of the world through ILO. To complete the bingo challenge for tonight's program, you're going to be keeping your ears peeled for a secret code. Going to just kind of slide right in there in the middle of conversation, so keep your ears peeled for it. And then also, as a note, we will record tonight's program so that you can revisit it if necessary at a later time. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for joining us and hand it over to Kevin.
Well, I just want to say,
Bill.
Sorry, Laura, I'm going to jump in, not to worry. I want to introduce Kevin briefly and say that we are so pleased to have you. Kevin Cassidy joined the United Nations at age 21, and he's worked at various agencies over nearly 4 decades. So without revealing age, Kevin, you've got a wealth of experience and wisdom to share with us about the organization and your career path. I'll just mention that shortly after you completed your master's degree in Economics and Political Development at Columbia's SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia in New York, you took on roles with the UN's Department of Peacekeeping operations on the issue of landmines, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, OCHA, and the Executive Office of the Secretary General, who was Boutros Ghali and Ban Ki-moon at the time you were in that office. Before joining the ILO, you also spent time with the Aga Khan Foundation in London as the Operations, Communications, and Partnership Director, and you were working on rural and community-based development in Central and South Asia for the foundation. At the ILO, you've had several positions, but again, the one that we are interested in is your current role as Director and Representative to the Bretton Woods Multilateral Organizations for the ILO's Office for the United States. Welcome, Kevin, and thank you so much again for the partnership and for your preparation of the questions, both for the local and this weekend's national competition. It's a lot of work, and we're delighted that you could be here with us tonight.
Bill, thanks very much, and Laura as well too, for all of your work in putting this together. It's been a real pleasure for me to be working with the World Affairs Council of America, and hopefully we'll have a very long partnership. I'd like to really kind of launch into what the ILO does. I mean, I think many of you students out there have kind of looked at their websites, maybe did a little bit of the research in preparation for the Academic World Quest. But the ILO is a very unique institution that has a different nature. It has a tripartite rather than intergovernmental nature. We are also a normative agency setting conventions, and we are also an international economic actor working with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the international financial institutions around the world. I would like to play a couple of videos and speak to those videos to kind of give you a sense of what the ILO does, so that it doesn't just seem like we're a bureaucratic institution that sort of sits on a hill in Geneva with little relevance to your life. It is actually out in the field and working with the workers and the employers and governments and helping people have better lives for themselves and what we call decent work. So if I can ask Laura to play our first video, and then I can speak to that.
My name is Jonas Astrup. I'm the Chief Technical Advisor for the ILO Third-Party Monitoring Project in Uzbekistan. I'm currently standing in a field just outside Tashkent, and behind me you can see the mountains of Tajikistan. On this field, when I turn around, behind me you will also see a lot of people in the field. And in a few months from now, this field will be full of cotton. Uzbekistan is the 6th largest cotton producer in the world. And at the peak, during the Soviet times, 90% of agricultural land in the country was used for cotton production. 2 million people participate in the annual cotton harvest in this country. Every year, from September and until November, 2 million people participate in the harvest to pick the cotton of the country. And Uzbekistan has had many problems with child labor and with forced labor in the cotton harvest. I'm pleased to say that we have been working with the government, with trade unions, with independent human rights activists and with private companies to reduce this problem. Wages have been increased significantly. The labor inspection is now working and doing its job, and there is mechanization being introduced. It is working, and I'm pleased to say that in 2013, the Uzbek government pulled back almost 2 million school children from the cotton harvest. And in 2017 and 2018, a further 500,000 people who were forced, teachers, nurses, doctors, and students, were pulled back from the cotton fields. And today, we don't have the problem of child labor in the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan any longer. And the problem with forced labor is rapidly disappearing. So it's working, and what we're doing is having an impact. Thank you.
So what you've just seen is a colleague of mine, Jonas Astrup, who has an MBA. Jonas has been running the project for us since 2015. As Jonas was talking about cotton, I mean, cotton is in all the products that we are wearing, right? It's in our shirts, it's in a combination of wool in our suits, it's in our blouses and our pants, and so many different products. So we're talking about global supply chains. And what Jonas was mentioning was that an old legacy system was forcing people to go out and do work. Now, even though people were being paid in this particular instance, they were being paid very low wages, it was very poor conditions of work. But the thing is that they had no choice. They had to do the work. And this is what the classic definition of the ILO is: forced labor. The ILO, which came into being at the end of World War I, has its normative role, which basically sets international conventions. And forced labor is an issue that we've been dealing with for a very long time, along with child labor. Children should be in school, not working. This way that they would have the skill sets to be able to compete in the future. And as Jonas was saying, 2 million people were recruited each year. This is the most massive recruitment system in the entire world, mobilizing over 2 million people just to pick cotton. So this now, with the ILO and the World Bank, there was something that came into play, which was called the Environmental and Social Frameworks, which the World Bank has put in place to say that even though we're lending to governments, we won't lend to them if they are in fact abusing these core principles. And the elimination of child labor, the elimination of forced labor are key to all of that as well too. So as Jonas was saying, the systemic use of child labor and forced labor has come to an end in Uzbekistan. So what is the next step? How can companies reinvest in the country? how can Uzbekistan move away from being an exporter of commodities of raw cotton and have value-added products? Because the economy won't move forward just on selling raw cotton. It is very important. It's in everybody's clothing. But how do they then create fabrics? How do they then create textiles? How do they increase their export earnings by selling to different markets? Because today there is a greater pressure on companies to sort of look at governance mechanisms to ensure that your goods that you are buying in the stores and online today don't have child labor or forced labor in that. And it is a very important earner for people. For example, in Uzbekistan, the average person is earning more in picking cotton today with the ILO putting in safeguards and ensuring that people have decent work than the average salary of a teacher. So this is really a tremendous change in the way things work. The next video I'd like to share with you is the work the ILO is doing with Syrian refugees in Jordan. Laura, if you'd be kind enough to run that video, please.
جيت هذا الرزم هذا السجارة محمد خربت الدار انهزمنا وصلنا 5 ساعة غادي عشر بشتري فيه مطارية بشتري مطارية وتغالين مطارية ما في شغل مخيب استجير هنا استجير هنا استجير هنا ولا يطلع فيه يدلمون بس والله اختي ما غدا واحد يردني جابتني لهون استجيرتني بعد شهر دفتر علي استجيرتهم بعد شهر دفتر علي عندي ماكينة بسوريا والله يا اخوي علمني الله يرحمه متوفى علمني شوي شوي تعلمت من اولاد اللي فيه فرج السن الطيب لا بس مضبوطة وقت مقدر بس هذه سوارة مثل ما بسوي لو عطلت اليوم بمشي حابة أظل أشتغل.
So you've just seen the highlight of an individual who's benefiting from the work of the ILO. This woman had fled the conflict in Syria, left everything behind, lost family, lost all their possessions, and fled. And they're in these camps. Now, I don't know if any of you out there have seen refugee camps. The High Commissioner for Refugees says that people stay in these refugee camps for 7 years. And that's not helping either the refugees, their children, or the host countries that they're in. So the ILO is working in a broader agenda in this particular case with the European Union to respond to the crisis in Syria, which is also impacting on Jordan, because when hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing violence or fleeing environmental disaster and they come into a country, it puts greater pressure on the resources of that country as well. So we both work with the refugees as well as the host communities. And what this is about is, in this particular instance, is ensuring that these factories that are making garments, for the European market, and it's under what's called the rules of origin. So the rules of origin are kind of the economic nationality of the clothing. It's not where they were transported through, but where they were actually made. And in order to get Jordan back on its feet, because the refugees consume a lot of services and no fault of their own. I mean, they're fleeing war. This happens all over the world, unfortunately, and still today. So with the rules of origin, goods that are made under certain conditions in Jordan can actually access the EU either without tariffs or very, very low tariffs. And this is very important. So the ILO is working with national stakeholders, basically the private sector and the government, to help facilitate decent job creation for Jordanians and Syrians in here, where we're sort of networking between the job seekers and the private sector who are looking to hire people. And this is happening through our Better Work Jordan project, which is usually it's in 9 countries around the world, and you'll see a story in Vietnam shortly. And we're working specifically with the refugee camps in Shahab or Zaha or Marif or Ibad or Zatari, these refugee camps. it's a multi-layered disaster in many ways when you flee to a new country. When you're in the camps, it's largely women and children that have fled the war that's going on, the conflict, because most of the men are in the battlefield or have died or are being held hostage or as prisoners of war. And they have to go off to work. They have to earn some money for themselves. What happens with the children? Are they left to their own devices? So the ILO works with local organizations to create creches. These are sort of daycare centers where the children can go and learn and have a normal life for themselves. The women going from the camp to the factory also are subject to harassment. So there are organizations that are sort of providing these bus services, transportation services, so the women are not harassed either physically or even sexually, which happens sometimes in these cases. So it's a multi-layered disaster that the ILO and other agencies or in the UN system are trying to help. And with the ILO's Better Work Jordan, it's in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor, it's working with the European Union, it's working with the trade unions, it's working with the employers. And this is very important to sort of get the economy working again and moving it forward. The last video I'd like to share with you is our Better Work in Vietnam. Better Work is a factory improvement project and looks at competition and productivity as well as decent work and living wages for the workers. So if you could, Laura, if you could run the last video for us, please.
Hello, I'm Chan from Better Work Vietnam. I'm now on a factory visit to a garment factory of Bristol Martin. You could see behind me a PICC member who are now in the group discussion. So I'm using this moment to share to you some information. My advisory work is to support the factory in improving working conditions, developing a healthy working place, and promoting work cooperation in the workplace. During my advisory work, I normally work with factory management and workers, bring them together and to find out the joint solution, measure the improvement progress, and taking action toward sustainable improvement. I find the work really really useful, and it has changed me a lot. I have a lot of motivation to work with the different people in the factory, and my work have what we are doing here and have significantly contributed to improve worker knowledge, skilled, and even income. This work have really empowered women in the workplace. I hope I have some more time to share with you. Now I need to be back to continue with my work to work with the pig. Thank you very much and see you later. Thank you.
My colleague Chan is an enterprise development specialist, which means that he works with businesses in order to improve the way in which they operate, both in the top line and bottom line. So new businesses being competitive, expanding the market, as well as bottom line and reducing costs. And reducing costs is not just about reducing the salary of workers. Actually, that's kind of a bad strategy because your workers are an investment. The workers are the ones who are making you profit. So you want to ensure that they are being paid well, that they are productive, that they are in good health, because a worker who is sick or ill or absent is a loss for the company as well too. He's working in a textile factory. I mean, there are, and I'll speak about the larger issue about why textile is important and why the ILO is primarily there, is that there are 60 million workers across the developing world that are in the garment industry, and 80% of them are women, mostly from rural areas. And this is usually their first job entering into the labor market, which means they're not as sophisticated. They're also at an asymmetrical power relationship. They cannot negotiate for better wages for themselves. So the ILO works with the unions. I mean, the word labor, it's an economics term, but it's really about people. It's about how people are trading their time, their industry, their talent, their skills for a fair remuneration, right? Because if people are earning money, they're able to then buy goods and services that go back in and create more economic growth as well too. So women are unfortunately at the lower end of the economic scale. Even in developed countries, women are earning 25% less than others. In developing countries, it's sometimes even up to 50% less than the men are earning. But what Chan is talking about is sitting at the table, or you sit in that little circle, and with the masks on and socially distanced, these are workers and employers sitting down and talking about how do we increase the opportunities for people to be more productive? How do we ensure that people have good working conditions? The global garment industry has been really significant in lifting millions of people out of poverty and providing empowerment for women. In the garment industry is highly competitive, and I think sometimes businesses don't realize that the demands that they have on the companies, because right now you have international buyers and local suppliers, and most of the big companies that we know don't actually produce or fabricate their own products. They outsource them to different countries. So then you have this big global supply chain. We saw in cotton that in the upstream, in the gathering of the commodities, whether it's to be woven into fabric or it's harvesting, say, cobalt for batteries. And so that's where child labor happens. That's where the exploitation happens. But when it comes to the factories, if we are asking for a lower price point, if we don't ensure that the companies know that we want to have those products made by people freely and that they are under good conditions, that this is not a sweatshop, we can do that with our wallets. We can actually purchase that. This is also a movement globally that there's growing disclosure requirements, which means that companies have demands on them for better human rights management systems. Some of these systems you may know about: the California Transparency and Global Supply Chains, the UK Modern Slavery Act, and our bingo word today, due diligence law, the EU mandatory due diligence law. But we've seen COVID-19. I'll speak a little bit about that before we get into the Q&A. The COVID-19 crisis has hit the garment sector in the Asia Pacific region particularly hard. It virtually collapsed in the first half of 2020. Millions of young women and men were out of work. And the cancellation by the international buyers meant that people had no work. So why should you care if somebody in India or in Pakistan or in Vietnam or in China has lost their job? I mean, it's very hard to get these companies going up again once they have closed down. Once the orders that have been placed and they're not paying for those orders, people have worked. I mean, what happens if you or your parents were working for a month and then all of a sudden the employer turned around and said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have any money, so we can't pay you for this. I mean, you would face starvation. You would fall, maybe have to leave school. You might have to even get a job to support the family. These are conditions that people in developing countries who are living along the very slim margin between poverty and survival. This is the challenges that they face. So we want to ensure that there is dialogue, what we call social dialogue. Again, it means workers and employers sitting down, discussing the issues, and ensuring that each one, I understand that you have costs as a factory owner, but you understand that I am trading you my time and giving you all of my talents and skills and energy, just as all of you students will be doing in the future when you go for your jobs. You want to make sure that you're being paid well for that. So the ILO is there to help people raise their voice. And I think just before we do the Q&A, could I ask you to run the Haiti Start Your and Improve Your Business video clip very quickly, Laura, please.
Moi c'est Belanda Domelis, moi sorti Tobec dans zone Valais. Moi c'est étudiante en agronomie, moi c'est esthéticienne, moi c'est technicienne tout en technique d'élevage. Moi c'est entrepreneur. Moi j'ai accepté participer à la formation pour me dire comment pour me gérer le business moi, pour me connaître comment agrandir le business moi. Bon formation t'a aidé en pile parce que moi j'ai un pile idée, même pas que bon idée claire. L'aime devine dans formation, on devine une idée claire par rapport au business nous besoin et mener. Ça vient nous rendre moi et après formation j'aime là, je faire business. J'ai changé un peu le bagage là parce que je ne connais pas faire économie, j'aime faire comme moi-même. J'aime aider à faire économie. Même l'école tout, je paye l'école pour moi. C'est tout ça, c'est par rapport à j'aime parce que je fais économie, je peux payer l'école. J'aime permettre l'idée à bien atterrir parce que je ne peux pas jamais faire perte par rapport à l'idée business moyen. C'est toujours bénéfice moi faire.
So two quick things there to say the ILO is about workers and employers. It is helping people develop their entrepreneurial skills so that they can create or bring to realization their ideas for a good business. The second part of that is also that the skills that this young lady in Haiti was learning, you may take for granted. You may know how to do an accounting sheet. You may know how to purchase goods. You may think that these things are very easy, but for a lot of people who don't have formal education, these programs on starting and improve your business is a lifesaver for them, and changes the trajectory not only of their lives and their families, but also their communities and their countries. So now we can open up the floor to some questions. So I'm happy to answer any of the questions, please.
Yes, and just so that the audience is aware, you can submit your questions in the chat box, but you can also raise your hand and we will unmute you to ask your question. You can do that using the reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
If I may, we have a few pre-submitted questions here before any hands go up, but please feel free to come in anytime. We do lots of paperwork. We also do a lot of discussing about these issues. I want you to know that one of the important things that we have, one of the most important skills, is listening. It's not just about talking. It's not just about writing research. It's not about cramming this down people's throats saying we're right and you must believe us. You have to understand people where they come from. You have to have empathy for where they are, both physically, emotionally, financially, and also culturally as well too. So working in international development, we do lots of research, we do lots of engagement with people. Obviously, speaking language is very important. I speak Chinese, I speak French, I speak a bit of Spanish. I encourage people who are looking at this to really do focus on languages. There's another question from Solomon, which is, does the ILO try to effect lasting change so that they can slowly phase out their operations and leave positive workplace conditions? Absolutely. Our job is to improve the conditions for the developing countries, but also in developed countries as well too. Jonas had mentioned child labor. Child labor is not just a developing country problem. Child labor exists in the United States. Child labor exists in Paris. It exists in China. It exists in all countries in Africa and Latin America. So child labor is about the exploitation of vulnerable people and people who are living on the edge of poverty. So our job is to hopefully work ourselves out of a job. But unfortunately, what we have seen is that as the world grows, and when we started in 1919, the population was much lower than it is today, which is over 7 billion. And by 2050, it will be 9 billion. So just imagine the people who will be living on the edge of existence. So our job is to sort of help out. David Benson has a question. We've been studying the problem of child slave labor in the chocolate industry in West Africa. Is the ILO working on it? Absolutely. The ILO has several programs that are going on in both in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana, which are the two major producers of the cacao seed, which is the primary product for chocolate. There are laws on the books that prohibit child labor being used, but unfortunately they find their ways into the supply chain. I mentioned to you this term upstream, which means the gathering of a commodity, whether it is harvesting cotton or coca seeds or cattle or some of the other products that go into the things that we buy. In wood, for example, or palm oil. Anyone who uses perfume, anyone who uses makeup, anybody who uses hand lotion, palm oil is a part of that. And this happens in Malaysia, it happens in Indonesia. And it's not because the parents don't like their children. The mother may go to the palm oil plantation and the kids are there because they can't afford school because they're very poor. So the mother thinks, well, instead of leaving them at home, they'll come with me and then the children will help me meet my quota. So then the children are engaged in these activities, helping mom put food on the table because they have no social safety nets, because they don't have any protection for themselves. So really, child labor occurs in every country, in almost every sector, and mostly in agriculture, which is either poor jurisdictions in the sense that they don't have labor inspectorates, or there is graft or corruption that can happen, or in fact that the supply chains are not being carefully monitored. And we really push businesses on this as well too. How do you make sure that lasting changes really do last? Well, child labor or forced labor, as we call it, or compulsory labor, this has been around in time immemorial. Slavery goes back to the beginning of humankind. It is an unfortunate characteristic of society in many ways, but we are trying to eliminate that in today's modern economy. No one should be forced to work. No one should be forcing children to work, and certainly not in the worst forms of child labor as well too. Once we have successes, for example, in child labor. We've been measuring it since 2000, and the ILO has been very active in this. The number was at 256 million. Our last estimates, and 2 years ago, showed 152 million. So it has reduced it by 100 million children have left child labor because there are educational opportunities for them, that there are social safety nets, that their older siblings or their parents are trained for better jobs. But now with COVID-19 and families facing total impoverishment, unfortunately, child labor is ticking back up because you have to marshal everyone in the family to go out and to earn money, to put food on the table, in order to put lights in the hut that one may live in, or even to have shelter yourself. So child labor and all these other sort of issues, unfortunately, is a constant battle, and we have to work on there. The work the ILO is currently doing regarding exploitation of refugees in the workforce, it's a great question. When people are moving, and we call labor migration, and most migration today is because people are looking for a better life for themselves. It means that there's no economic opportunities for where they live, or there is violence, either in the form of gang violence, internecine warfare. It could be ecological disaster that are pushing people, or there could be the pull factor because there are better jobs someplace, and you may be a mason, or you may be a doctor, or you may be a driver, or a logistics specialist, and you'll go where the money is. Unfortunately, people will be leaving their country. It's usually the people who have opportunities and have skills that will travel to find good jobs, but there are also people who are low skilled because, again, the destitution that they face. So we do work alongside other UN agencies, the International Organization of Migration, the UN Commissioner for Refugees, and a number of other agencies, the World Bank as well too, to ensure that there are protections for workers in the workplace. So we do work on the policy side with governments. We do a lot of research on these issues, and not every situation is the same, and you can adapt them, but you cannot just template a solution from one country to the next. Every country, every situation is different, and it does require very specific data sets, and gathering that data, analyzing that data, and being able to replicate your solutions is very important for policy formulation. I see David Benson has put a question. We use a book that our students love, Where Am I Eating? Spends time living with the workers around the world to learn about their lives and challenges. The ILO work to outreach to workers. Does the ILO approach the cross-cultural challenges of communicating effectively with workers? Absolutely. As you saw, Chan is a Vietnamese national. He understands the conditions there. He is also a business development specialist and entrepreneurship. So he understands those issues both culturally and also business-wise. So it is important to have specialists who are familiar not only with the subject matter, but also the geographical area as well too. But it does require a great deal of research. Our headquarters is back in Geneva. We do have offices around the world, project offices as well as regular offices. But there are other UN agencies we work with, like UNDP or UNICEF, and to address these issues. It is really important to understand what the concerns are of workers. Not everybody is looking to be a millionaire. People just want to put money in their pocket. And if you give somebody who is sort of poor an extra dollar, I think the research shows that a dollar spent by somebody in the economy generates $1.78 worth of economic activity. So it does pay to pay the workers better at the lower economic scale, because they will buy, the sneakers or the books for school or the mats or the clothing or household appliances or televisions or mobile phone bills. When you give people money at the very top, they put it into investment instruments, and that works in the financial industry, but it doesn't work really good for generating jobs for people. So you do have to go out and work with people, understand where the jobs are, look at appropriate technology transfer. For example, I was in Banda Aceh in 2004 when the tsunami came and struck and killed 200,000 people on this small city on the Sumatra Peninsula in Indonesia. And some companies came in with big road grading machines and big asphalters and put a big highway alongside the beach, and it looked very nice for cameras, but it wasn't very appropriate. So the ILO had an intensive employment program where we worked with the local people, where we did the Cadam Road processes. And anybody who's been to the countryside knows that this very simple technique of putting gravel, dirt, tar, dirt, gravel, tar, which makes a hard packed road, that's very easy to repair. and is a very durable road as well too. And then by having thousands of people working on the job rather than having one machine which works for 3 days and is down 4 days for maintenance, and then the money for renting that machine goes off to a third country, all the money is kept in that country. So you give appropriate technology, techniques that people can use, and then it was creating micro-enterprise where women who were living in the local villages would cook extra food and sell it to people working at the road project, and selling water, or young men with their two-stroke motorbikes coming up and becoming taxis. So you have to look at the situation, understand where people are. Does the ILO employ anthropologists in its work? And I'm not really sure, but I mean, as I'm describing to you, that we have to have an anthropological view of the world around us. That comes sometimes through development economics, that sometimes comes through international relations, it comes through law, it comes through a lot of different disciplines. I myself am an economic and political development specialist, but in my undergraduate, I loved history, I loved geography, I studied Chinese, I studied political science. So the ILO has people of all different disciplines. So anthropology could certainly be one of those, but our job is to ensure that people are working together, that they ensure that they have a voice in that workplace, and that things move forward economically as well as socially. Because you can't just have economic progress and then you create a disequilibrium with great inequalities. That just creates for a stratified society, and that is terribly unsustainable. And we've seen the devastation of that as well too. If there are any other questions, or did I miss anything here?
I've got one, Kevin.
I will be, oh, okay.
Please go ahead.
Sorry, Bill. I will be selfish and ask a question, since it doesn't appear that we have any others at the moment. So hearing all the incredible work that the ILO is doing, and your answers to some of these really well thought out questions, makes me feel like, oh, these are really big, huge issues. So where do I, as the individual consumer, come into that role? And so sometimes I like to think of, looking for stamps on chocolate. Is it fair trade? Is it Rainforest Alliance? Does it have that stamp of approval? So what are some great ways for individual students to, you go to the store and you want to buy a Hershey bar, there's one, it might be a little bit extra, but it's got those stamps that make you feel a little bit better about what you're purchasing. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the role of an individual consumer.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, what you're talking about, what we call social labeling. I mean, the ILO doesn't do social labeling for a variety of reasons. It's but civil society doesn't. I think it's a great idea. Media shines a light on these issues. I mean, the work we're doing in Uzbekistan was pushed forward by researchers and the media and civil society. There is unfortunately a boycott on Uzbek cotton, which now I think has been dropped because of the numbers in forced labor have basically been to a statistically insignificant number at the moment, and is further going down. There's a bit of stickiness at the local level. But in terms of what you can do as a consumer, be aware of these issues. Be aware of the products that you're buying, right? Ensure that the companies that you're spending your dollars for are actually treating their workers right as well, because if they're not treating their workers right, they're not treating the people in the supply chain well either. I mean, there are big companies that have been actively against unionization. I mean, unionization is no more than really having a representative. One of the fundamental rights for the ILO is collective bargaining and freedom of association, which means freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, security of person. These are fundamental rights that are enshrined in just about every constitution in the world today. So you should be aware as a consumer, not just come at it from a price point of view, but also, are these companies that you admire? Are these companies that are doing the right thing? You can share that information or read more on it. You can write a letter to the editor. You can ask questions. You can write a letter for your school newspaper. You could come to the ILO website and see what we have. The US Department of Labor has a list of all the products that are made with child labor, and you'll see chocolate there, you'll see sugarcane there, you'll see cotton, you'll see cattle, you'll see cobalt, you'll see all of these products. And you should make sure that the company that is taking your consumer dollars is doing the right thing. So again, awareness is very important. Informing others as well too, talking to your parents about this, and ensuring that that you would treat the people who are making the goods for you as you would want to be treated yourself. Because when we use the term labor, we are talking about people. people who work, and people who work have families. And if somebody loses the job or somebody is being paid poor wages, that impacts negatively on their family. And I don't think that you or your family would want to see other people being impoverished just because you want to have a real low price on something. Just demand more from the companies that you're buying from, but also be aware of that situation, because not all the companies are bad. Some of the companies are doing an excellent job.
Kevin, there was a comment by Karen Newman to everyone regarding the question of a stamp of approval, especially after the Seaspiracy documentary, and also on the positive side that Fashion Makes Change has accomplished. You could learn more at www.fashionmakeschange.org. In closing, first of all, I want to thank you for the wonderful videos that I know you pulled together in a very short period of time and took us around the world. These stories were by and large positive. I wonder what happens when you come up against a government or a leadership that is very reluctant to adopt the standards and the rights that you espouse and other UN organizations and agencies promote. What are the strategies you use to get these accepted?
Yeah, you know, Bill, that's probably the billion-dollar question or the trillion-dollar question. Look, the ILO, like the UN system, we are an intergovernmental organization. So we are invited in for the countries. We work together collaboratively with governments to make positive change for their citizenry. It's not easy. As I said, with the ILO since 1919, we've been fighting against child labor. So what are the strategies we use? Well, first of all, it's about communication, it's about dialogue, it's about awareness of the issue themselves, but it's also on our part to look at how do we move towards global standards? How do we convince people through research, through data analysis, through sharing best practices? Because we can help countries do better because we have 100 years of experience globally about what works in certain situations and what doesn't. We are collecting information, for example, about what countries have been very successful in building back from COVID-19. So it does require a lot of engagement because the ILO is not a supranational institution that will go in and paratrooper in our labor inspectorates and then charge in and stop these factories from operating ineffectively or by abusing the workers' rights. So it's not always easy. It does require a great deal of patience. You indicated at the beginning, I started when I was 21. I'm encouraged. I believe that this is a process. And one of the things I want to leave the students with, and this is really, really important to everyone, so please remember this if you don't remember anything else, is that compromise is not a dirty word and it's not a weakness. We have to move forward in society as a community of nations. We don't understand everything, right? That's why we have to listen a lot. I think my grandfather always said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use those accordingly. So it is important that we understand other people, where they're coming from, where the concerns are. There are sometimes misuse of cultural customs, why things are done, but you can show people better ways. You can help them with that. You can build opportunities for people and create a better environment economically and socially for countries, which again, we haven't really cracked it for the rest of the world, but just look at where we've come from. I think that's the most important thing. Where were we in 1919? Where actually the rules of the road of the economy didn't exist because the modern capitalist economy did not exist. It was one of many competing economic models of mercantilism and barter trade. I mean, there were different economic models around the world that still are in existence. So we are moving forward. Now natural resources are important. Now the pantheon of sustainable development goals becomes important. We're more attuned to the environment around us on sustainability. And so I do encourage the Fashion for Change and the No Dolphins Tuna Nets. I mean, everybody has to do their bit. Even, for example, NOAA is involved in tracking these kind of dark fleets that are going around and overfishing in international waters. So it takes a community of the whole. It can't just be the ILO. It can't just be the UN. It can't just be individuals. It has to be all of us working together to move that forward. And I think we'll get there. Hopefully, not with a catastrophic situation, as happens in some instances, but we are moving forward, and I am positive about it. But my time will eventually come where I will hand on the baton to those young men and women who are sitting in the audience today. And I hope and I wish you success. And hopefully you'll be speaking to people 37 years down the road, and you'll remember a little bit about what we've talked about today.
Well, I hope also, Kevin, that they have the passion that you still have all these years later for the work that you do. It's quite impressive and reflects on your leadership. I want to thank you very much for joining us and presenting such a wealth of information in just a short amount of time. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on Saturday, competition day, when the students convene for the 3-hour slugfest that is Academic World Quest virtual edition. Tomorrow, we're going to feature, I'm glad also that you introduced Uzbekistan as part of the program tonight, Kevin, because tomorrow we will zoom in on that country, literally and figuratively, with Elena Sung, who is the executive director of the American Uzbek Chamber of Commerce, and she'll look at the aspirations and hopes and dreams of the Uzbek people and the state of bilateral relations with the United States and what's going on in the world and what they hope to achieve. So until tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, on behalf of Laura Duncan and the whole team at WACA, we thank you for joining us. This session will be recorded and shared in our communications starting tomorrow, and we hope it will be used by the educators, anytime you come upon multilateral institutions and the ILO in particular. So I want to thank you again, Kevin Cassidy and your team. Have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Good night.